So you're telling me that Matt Wells wants Avery Johnson to run the football? Count me in.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rao, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. Today's episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every moment count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward, Mazda Move and Be Moved. Look, something that moved me was the Chris Klieman show that happened on K-State's social medias and the radio just on Wednesday evening. And I'm going to come out with this episode today on Friday to talk about how, one, it wasn't Chris Klieman that was at the guest for his own show. It was Matt Wells, the offensive coordinator. How that actually could mean something. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what he talked about. And the biggest takeaway is that he mentioned on multiple occasions wants to make happen Avery Johnson running the football. Talk about an adjustment. Talk about looking for an identity. That's exactly what I want to dig into this one. Then we're going to talk some other things. He talked about the running back room, wide receivers, offensive line, you name it. We're going to dig into all of that on this conversation. He also talked about the quarterback twos. So we'll get that finally in this conversation right here on Locked On Kansas State. Hit that subscribe button as we're bringing you Wildcat coverage like no one else every single day. Well, Matt Wells, of course, with the off week, Chris Klieman not being there, Matt Wells steps in for the Chris Klieman Show on the K-State Sports Facebook page, social media, on the radio as well. I happen to watch it on Facebook, on the K-State Sports Twitter page. And of course, getting ready for the UCF game next Saturday, not this Saturday, next Saturday. That game time has been announced. It's going to be an 11 a.m. Central Time kickoff. You got an early game on Saturday. Pretty nice, different change of pace after playing on Friday night just last week against Arizona. So that's pretty good. But Matt Wells being on there, and of course, they talked about trying to find the identity. That was the leading question, was trying to look for the identity of this team. And Matt Wells said, he called it out. He said they got exposed, talking about mostly the offense, of course, although he does have head coaching experience. They did really focus on offensive questions, which makes sense because that's where his mind and all of his energy is focused at the moment. But he said no one is hurting more than coaches and players about this loss. And that's probably true. I mean, you're 1-3 right now, and you're supposed to be a Big 12 contender. You are not feeling up to the lived potential that this team is even remotely close to being at. They should be, 3-1, 4-0. That's exactly where this team should be. And kind of doubled down on the whole player-led program thing. And he spoke on his behalf and on Avery Johnson's behalf because he's not only just the offensive coordinator, but Matt Wells is the quarterback coach as well, and spoke about how they're focused on owning it and making sure that the players, the leaders are definitely sticking up and owning to it, and saying that there has been too many plays that they wish they could get back. And he's kind of talking about an example of Avery Johnson, saying that they try to come back and talk to each other after the game when they're trying to debrief and prep for the next week and going through film. He's like, he basically said he's okay if Avery has maybe 1 to 2 or 3 plays he'd like to have back. He said this past week that wasn't the case. Avery wanted 5 or 6 back, and Coach Wells wanted 5 or 6 as well, and they weren't the same plays. And of course, that's going to be a big problem. We're talking a multiple different amount of plays, and especially when you have 53 offensive plays, that's a big deal. But the biggest thing I have to get to, and we're not going to misquote him. I'm going to read you the entire quote. We're going to make sure we're not aggregating this. We're going to get the exact reason what he said here, because this is no lie. Matt Wells wants Avery Johnson to run the football. And I absolutely love this. He brought up that he wishes Avery Johnson would run the football more. I'm going to give you the entire quote of what he said, so he is not misquoted on this conversation. He said, quote, talking about Avery Johnson, he said, he has improved as a passer. He has improved his downfield throwing. There are still decisions that we make that are not right. He's not perfect, but he has totally grown. He's doing better out of the pocket. I think there's times where I wish he'd run a little bit more, and he's seen it and he knows. but so much growth has been made in game, and that's where we struggled in last year in game. And that's where he tends to go on. That's where I ended the quote, but then he talks about how last year he struggled mightily in BYU, and then he saw a lot of growth, and then mentioned the Oklahoma State game of last year. But did you hear what was in the middle of that quote? He wants Avery Johnson to run the ball even more. I love that. I absolutely love hearing that from Matt Wells, because that's exactly what everybody's hearing. And when the radio host was talking about Avery Johnson running the football, he said it's a fair question. It's an absolute fair question that needs to be answered. And that's when that quote came out. I needed to hear that from Matt Wells. Now, will that happen next Saturday against UCF? Because there was also a couple other things that didn't make me feel great about the entire situation of what he said about Avery Johnson as well. He also said that he doesn't believe that Avery Johnson is a 15 carry guy, and talked about his body type. If you remember, I shared a tweet a few weeks ago. Ryan Wallace of, I believe, KCSN now said how he compared Lamar Jackson in college, how he compared, I believe it was another, I can't remember the other quarterback, but their size and height compared to the carries. Lamar Jackson, of course, is not Avery Johnson. I'm not comparing them one by one, but the height and weight, the physical stature was exactly the same. And Lamar Jackson had no problem running the football. So he said that was his opinion, but that's not a great opinion to have if you're the offensive coordinator of Avery Johnson and you don't think that he can take 15 carries and what in his mind is 15 hits, which wouldn't always come down to that in the case. You know, he's talking about when you're trying to get Avery Johnson in the running game, you really only have two options. And he said, although he wants to get him to run the football more, you only have two options. It's down to the read game and quarterback designed runs. He said the defenses are playing Avery Johnson completely different than they did last year and extremely different than they did 2 years ago, because it was only just a certain package for Avery Johnson in his freshman season. I guess I don't disagree with that, but good coaches find ways to adapt and adjust to this. Matt Wells did come out on the radio show and say this is his 29th year coaching, so he should have a lot of experience in making those right adjustments. I'd like to see those adjustments this coming week against UCF, hopefully by running the football with Avery Johnson more. He said this: I believe there's a limit when there's unblocked defenders, like shades to the offensive lineman. That's what he said. He said, I believe there's a limit when there's unblocked defenders. That's complete shade to the offensive line. The offensive line had some missed assignments, those designed runs, with the exception of that one where he tripped. A lot of those, I mentioned it on the reaction show right after the game on Friday. Those linemen were basically yelling, look out to Avery Johnson because he was getting tackled in the backfield and any of those designed runs. But again, he doubled down and said, quote, I do want to see him run more. He can help us. Absolutely. We've been screaming it on the rooftops for the entire season so far. Run Avery Johnson. Now, there's been a couple moments where you look in the game, because it's easy to call out Matt Wells and say he's not making those plays. He's not calling the right ones to make happen. But there have been some moments where Avery had the opportunity to run on a scramble, but instead threw it. And the one that I'm really thinking of was a third down, had the opportunity to most likely get the first down with his feet, makes an ill-advised throw, off-balance throw, and makes an incompletion. They have to wind up punting on that drive. That's just one scenario. And I'm sure that's actually probably one of the plays that Avery Johnson wants to get back that he was discussing with Matt Wells this past weekend. So maybe it's not all Matt Wells that we need to be pushing our frustration on. Maybe it's a little bit of execution with Avery Johnson. I'm trying to be transparent here. I'm trying to keep an open mind on what exactly is wrong, because if we are trying to point out and say this is the only issue, we're probably looking at the situation with blinders on. And we can't do that. We can't do that. We got to make sure that if this team is looking for an identity, we have to look outside the box as well, 360-degree coverage on what could possibly be wrong with this team. So maybe it's not just a Matt Wells issue, as we have all dived in immediately to say. Now, I'm not taking him off the hook by any means, but I'm saying maybe it also is an execution problem with Avery Johnson, and that's something that needs to be looked at maybe a little tighter under the microscope going into the UCF game. Again, I talked about how he believes his body type is not the type that'd be able to take 15 carries or 15 hits a game. I just don't believe that one. I don't believe that. I think Avery Johnson would be fine. Of course, he had some dings and injuries last season. I don't think that makes you be nervous about playing this year. And of course, you already lost Dylan Edwards, but at 1-3, and in this case, 0-1 in the Big 12 conference, you can't go game by game thinking, well, we can't run this play because our player might get hurt. You got to play to win the game. And if that situation is the best for you because you have a dual threat running quarterback like Avery Johnson, who is dangerous with his legs when utilized properly and the offensive line steps up, we're going to talk about the offensive line in just a minute. If that's the best way to win the football game, then that's the way you got to go. So I hope what he is saying here is maybe a feeling, maybe he's talking directly to us and saying, give me a week. Let me figure this out and let me get Avery Johnson the ball more. Because he was on the Chris Klieman Show on Wednesday, filling in for the head coach. Of course, has head coaching experience as the offensive coordinator. But him filling in on Wednesday shows a lot more about what the future plans of this coaching staff is. I think it's something that we must address. We're going to talk about that next, right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, this episode of Locked On Kansas State is brought to you by Mazda, moving the game forward. For those who believe it, it's not just about the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put the points on the board. They move crowds, move culture, and keep moving the game forward. Jayce Brown has my moment. The weak moment that moved the game forward is Jayce Brown in the second half, that 70-yard rush. It changed the entire feeling of that football game. Although they didn't wind up winning the game, it gave life to the game for Kansas State, and it might be just the small amount of momentum this team needs on creativity and finding identity heading into the bye week. So when you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. This episode of Locked On Kansas State is also brought to you by Wayfair. The weather's cooling down, the days are getting shorter, and that has me wanting to make my home feel even cozier. And when it comes to cozying your space this fall, Wayfair is the place to go. Wayfair has everything you need to set the mood for the season, whether it's a comfy recliner, warm bedding, autumn decor, or even an espresso machine so you can make your favorite latte at home. I just moved into this place a few months ago, this brand new house that has this nice studio that you've been seeing if you're an everydayer, and I used Wayfair to get myself a nice sectional couch and a nice recliner. I really enjoy my living room space right now. Just actually enjoyed the Thursday night football game with that, watching the Bills beat the Dolphins. And I thank Wayfair for keeping me comfortable, because cozify your space with Wayfair curated collections of easy, affordable fall updates, from comfy recliners to cozy bedding and autumn decor. You'll find it all the way less at wayfair.com. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. What does it mean that Matt Wells was the replacement for Chris Klieman in the Chris Klieman Show on Wednesday? Does it mean anything at all? Does it mean that Chris Klieman just wanted not to be on the show because it's the off week and he wanted a down week? Or does it actually have a subtle meaning, a sly, shady meaning that Matt Wells isn't going anywhere? Maybe this was a direct kind of shot at the fan base from Chris Klieman, saying, look, I'm going to go ahead and throw my shot. I'm not going to talk to the press conference on Monday. I'm not going to talk to the media on Monday. And I'm going to have Matt Wells go in my spot on Wednesday. A coach that many are calling for his firing. And instead, I'm going to double down and say, no. We're going to keep Matt Wells. Not only am I going to keep Matt Wells this week, I'm going to have him show up and answer questions for the media. And that's the only availability you're getting is from Matt Wells. Maybe it's showing a true confidence and trust. Maybe it's a friendship thing because they've been friends for so long. That's never a good thing. That's a really dangerous thing when you hire your friends, but that's a different kind of conversation for today. But what does that tell you? Does it tell you that, it's a message of his own? That's exactly what I got from it. When I was watching this, and I found that Wells was the guest on this show instead of Chris Klieman, when a lot of people in the comments on Locked On Kansas State, on social media. You can find it on Locked On K-State, but people chiming in all across the socials of Kansas State, the family, the network, even alumni have been talking about it on different channels. You can check it out. I mean, there's some great content this past week about really just peeling back the layers of this team not meeting the standards of Kansas State football. And the reply that we get from the head coach, Chris Klieman, is a silent one, but also one saying, I'm going to send my offense coordinator out. The one that you want him, basically, his head on a stick, I'm going to send it out to you and make sure that he is the one answering the questions this week. I just found it interesting. And it might show you that he's not going anywhere. Or, and I don't think this is the case, but or you could take it as he's throwing Matt Wells to the dogs and wants him to be the only one answering the media questions on the radio show and moving forward. The questions weren't hardball questions. They were pretty softball questions. That's not where I'm taking it after watching, after watching that show. But either way, an interesting way for Matt Wells. He talked about the entire offense here, and I want to dig into it. Let's talk about the wide receivers next. He really digged into Jayce Brown and Jaron Tibbs. We called Jayce Brown the best thing for Jayce when they said, how is he so good? How is Jayce Brown so good this season? He always finds a way to do good things. We talk about it all the time. Def taxes, big play Jayce, right? Well, he says the best thing for Jayce is actually having Tibbs on the other side. And he also mentioned Bradley until he got hurt, but he called him straight line speed, said he's a one-cut vertical threat, and it's just such a big thing to have for Avery Johnson on this offense. He talked about how he's doing such a better job at catching the football, and he mentioned the one pass he didn't get against Army, but he said there's no use at yelling at him because he is so competitive that he's not going to he wants that more than the coaches are, right? He's more mad about it than himself. He talked about also the radio host brought up a really interesting stat, and I want to share it with you. He got a catch last week, of course, in the Arizona game. And that makes it now 25 straight games for Jayce Brown to catch a game. So really interesting about that. Actually, Matt Wells made a joke about it, said now he added a lot more pressure on trying to keep that streak alive, but he ended that conversation saying, I don't think that'd be a problem. With Tibbs, he said he's a great and smart player. He said that he's had them playing the X, the Z, and also already playing in the slot this year. Great red zone threat. The catch radius is absolutely insane. And that's what we discussed this offseason too. When we continued to talk about and market and get excited about the size that the wide receivers were bringing in with Tibbs and Bradley, we said, Avery Johnson, a lot of people think that he doesn't have the accuracy to throw the football. Well, bringing in this size of these wide receivers should naturally fix that. Well, Matt Wells kind of doubled down and backed that up and said his catch radius is outstanding. And if you look at Avery Johnson's completion ratings for most of the games, Arizona's probably the worst one. And I think it is the worst one looking at the stats. I don't have them in front of me at the moment. But his completion percentage has been pretty dang good. So maybe that's a big helpful thing here, having those tall wide receivers in action. Lincoln Kiener came up because of course, we want to talk about Lincoln Kiener. He finally got his moment. He finally got his time in the game, 13 snaps. And Coach Wells said that he will continue to play that or more heading through the season. And he was basically kind of brought it up that he finally got his moment, that one time to get it done, to get the butterflies out. The ball didn't come in his direction, but he did make a good block. He also did point out that he missed the block. So I think he wanted to give a little shade to say, hey, although you're the most talented recruit in program history, according to 24/7, we want to make sure you're still working hard. And I don't think that's anything that's not happening with Lincoln Kiener. He did miss a month of practice. That's why we finally got him to see him play in Arizona. Been looking forward to see what he does against UCF. He also said, Matt Wells said, his first catch and his first touchdown is coming up. The sky is the limit for Lincoln Kiener. That is things that make you exciting. Makes you excited. But it also makes you a little bit concerned, doesn't it? Because if this team continues to go in the path that they're going, Lincoln Kiener was very close to going to Oregon instead of Kansas State, if you remember his recruiting at the beginning of last season. Transfer portal opens just one time now in the beginning of January. So a lot of things to discuss and be worried about that. I think there's something you can't worry about in the middle of the season. But look, he's only played one game. He can play 3 more and then decide to redshirt and doesn't even lose eligibility and go somewhere else. That's something that's going to be on my mind if they can't get right against UCF, against Baylor, and against TCU. They're just saying. I don't want to be negative, but that's something that's definitely going to be a concern for me. He also brought up the offensive line, and he stated the obvious. We're going to get to that in just a second. And we finally got a little bit of news, maybe a little bit of a nugget about the quarterback 2 race behind Avery Johnson. We'll talk about all that next to finish up the show right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, this episode of Locked On Kansas State is brought to you by Square. Your favorite neighborhood spot runs on Square. Like Varsity Donuts on Manhattan Avenue, you can stop and get that maple bacon donut, late night donuts as well. There are certain businesses that truly make the neighborhood feel like home, whether it's the local sports bar packed on game days, that coffee shop or donut shop that knows your order by heart, or the corner deli that's been serving your community for decades. These are the places that bring people together. When the neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood thrives. And these local spots are what makes neighborhoods feel like home, and so many of them run on Square. So Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/lockedoncollege to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot like Varsity Donuts. You'll be happy you did. Square, see you in the neighborhood. This episode of Locked On Kansas State also brought to you by DoorDash. It's almost the weekend, and it's time to look back at and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered. Powered by DoorDash, just like you can every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go with Garrett Hardstad. Blocking that punt against Arizona. We're talking about streaks here. That blocked punt makes it for Kansas State 8 straight seasons in a row that they have at least one block punt on the season. Pretty cool special teams stat on that one. So Garrett Hardstad, shout out to you. And just like Hardstad, who delivered for Kansas State, DoorDash delivers you Saturdays with DoorDash Streaks. You save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period ends 11/18. Matt Wells was on the Chris Klieman Show, filling in for the head coach. Could be a message, could be just a coincidence, or who knows. But either way, was talking about the offense, talked about how Avery Johnson needs to run the football more, talked about the wide receivers, talked about a whole bunch of stuff. And what he also discussed was the obvious. He stated the obvious out loud, and he even said that. Let's talk about the obvious. The running game needs to improve. And discussed how all the other running backs, of course, wants to get Dylan Edwards back. That was something that he brought up. He didn't really dig too deep into Dylan Edwards, just saying that he wants him back. Of course you do. He's a very electric player. When you saw him on the field against Arizona, just those 4 carries, you could feel that the offense just have a little bit of a different feel. But did kind of shout out all the rest of the running backs, how they're growing, they're developing, they're working hard, but somebody's got to step up. And stating the obvious is the big thing. He then shifted his focus to the offensive line. And I don't know exactly who he was talking about. I might have an idea just based on PFF scores, and we've talked about that in the past. But he said, the pass protection of the offensive line was an issue, and pass protection and run protection as well. But he talked about the protection. He said it was an issue. But he said, but you know what it was? It was just one guy. He said it was only one offensive lineman. The rest of them did great. He didn't give a name, but we can go ahead and speculate. I'm going to speculate that player he was talking about, if you're talking about having not the best run blocking or pass protection, was JB Nelson. JB Nelson didn't have a great game when you look at the PFF stats. He was at the bottom of the offensive line when it comes to the PFF scores. So I'm guessing it was him. There's a potential that it could be Andrew Leingang because his run blocking isn't great when you look at PFF numbers, but his pass protection is fantastic. So I don't think it's him, but those are the 2 I speculate. I'm leaning towards it being JB Nelson as the person he was discussing. So when we are looking at who is starting on the offensive line next Saturday, that can be maybe a reason why, if there are some changes, if maybe we don't see a guy like JB Nelson starting at either the left or right guard position, that might be your answer why. He didn't bring up a name, and I didn't expect him to, but it was just interesting that he brought that up in general because, of course, that's you don't want to call out your players like that, saying this guy is just terrible. But he did say it's just one player. So he's trying to be accountable. He's trying to do that. And I'm pretty sure that means that conversation has already happened in room. So kind of saying it again might be a way to get that veteran player, if it's a guy like Line Gang or JB Nelson, which again, I do think it's JB, to kind of say, hey, we're holding you accountable. We are well aware of what that position is. And who knows if NIL changes the way that these conversations are being had too, right? Because you're talking about people coming in the transfer portal. There's no money at stake. I wonder if these conversations are different. You got to think the locker room's different, especially if you're a player-led program that Kansas State has. This money definitely has changed the way that coaches have to coach. And I think Kansas State's seeing that possibly in a negative light right now. Let's finish up with something interesting here. We finally got just a small idea, but something about the backup quarterback race between Duff and Barnett and Jacob Knuff. We finally got something. And he said both are growing and developing well, talking about Duff and Barnett. But he also said, and he brought in Jacob's name in this conversation, he said it's an ongoing battle with those and Jacob Knuff, all three of them. But what he said, and this, take this as you will, he said none of them are rising up and above in practice. He said none of them are stepping up to be that backup guy. It sounds like it's this like ever competing competition between the three of them. That could be a good thing. That could be a blessing in disguise, or that could be a head scratcher if something does happen to Avery Johnson. And maybe that's why they're so concerned about not running Avery Johnson 15 times. Maybe this is a big full circle right there. They can't afford to get Avery Johnson hurt because they have no idea what they have behind him. I don't know. I don't agree with that scenario, but again, trying to understand the thought process behind this coaching staff. He talked about none of them have risen up because of practice, because he talks about how in game weeks, Avery Johnson's getting 75% of the practice reps. And of course he is, because they got to make sure they're ready for game day, things like that. And he said usually the other 25% would go to a backup quarterback. But this year he's trying to split up that 25% across those three quarterbacks. So no one's really getting a lot of snaps, in-game snaps, in practice reps as well. So it's tough for anybody to break out. He also discussed how because of the 105 roster size, although that's not implemented this year, Kansas State did let a lot of players go and find a new place to play football in case that was going to happen. And then the settlement changed, and that's not getting grandfathered into next year. However, I think Kansas State only started the season with about 107 players. Matt Wells said that's not the case anymore. There is no way that 105, 107 players are practicing right now due to all the injuries. So one thing that has not happened over the past couple weeks is what Chris Klieman likes to do in practice, between one in the outdoor, one in the indoor facility, and do double reps. And with double reps, that means you can have two quarterbacks going at one time. There's so many injuries this year that you can't do double reps at this moment. So that means only Avery Johnson is really getting those reps. And that's huge. And because of those injuries, he mentioned and kind of brought up last year's Taquan Robinson as an example. He said they did so many double reps last year that he got to improve coming from the summer, and then he got the transfer out and he found himself in with the University of Buffalo this next season. So interesting to see about that. We'll see more, hopefully, about the quarterback 2 situation, just from a conversational standpoint, obviously in any in-game, unless there's a blowout, which the way we've been playing so far this season, don't think that's going to happen. We thought that was going to be maybe against North Dakota or Army. Don't see that happening anytime in Big 12 play this season. Let me know your thoughts on what you think about Matt Wells being at the head coach show on Wednesday, and what you think about Avery Johnson, how he thinks Avery Johnson should run the ball more. Is it just him trying to say that to be a crowd pleaser, or is that something that maybe we should take as gospel and be focused on Avery Johnson getting more of a share of moving the football and being that dual threat quarterback we're hoping he can be next week against UCF? Let me know in the comment description below. Hit like and subscribe while you're there. If you're listening in audio form, do me a favor, hit that follow button and rate 5 stars if you can. We're going to bring you Kansas State coverage every single day like no one else. Thank you so much. Please like the video. Please subscribe, and we'll see you back here next time right here on Locked On Kansas State.